It's now 2:04 Eastern Time, and I'd like to welcome you all to Savoring and Saving Fine Chocolate with our uh, excellent speaker, Pam Williams, who is the founder and chief instructor at Ecole Chocolat in Vancouver, British Columbia. She's also been on the board of a sister culinary organization, the International Association of Culinary Professionals, back when she could drink wine with luminaries like Julia Child and uh, Jacques Pepin and Graham Greene and other giants in our recent history. And Pam is also a past president of Les Dames d'Escoffier International. So, yeah, with that uh, luminous background, let me uh, hand it over to Pam for a presentation followed by discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sheila. And welcome, everybody. This is very exciting to talk about ruby chocolate real quick because we just mentioned that. Ruby was brought out by Callebaut as a kind of a new way of making chocolate. It basically, they take the beans and through some proprietary process, take out a lot of the bitterness. So you end up with something that's kind of a milk chocolate without the milk. It's just a lighter, kind of very fruity chocolate. I find it just a little bit bland, like not very exciting, but for those applications where you want something in the background, it's beautiful. It's pink. It's kind of a fuchsia pink color. So it really pops when you use it, but it doesn't have tons of flavor. So we'll just say that for that. And so one of the things I did when asked to do this was I went out to the board of directors and I said, okay, what do you want to know about chocolate? Because we're such an experienced group in the culinary, beverage, hospitality, I'm not sitting here talking to consumers, even though you are consumers. I'm really talking to people who know a lot about food and whose food is, like, for me, kind of their life. So I said, what do you really want to talk about? And a lot of it had to do with what is chocolate, where does it come from, um, all the kind of things that have been happening lately about chocolate, um, all sorts of things. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I'm hoping to only talk for about 25 minutes, maybe. I get excited because this is my passion and has been my whole life. And so if I go over, forgive me. And Sheila will knock on my door and tell me to shut up if I go too far, because I want to leave time for a lot of questions. And I hope that most of you had an opportunity just to read through the PDF that I sent out to the office and ask them to send that out to you, because it does go into some of the science around cadmium, lead, some of the things that people are have been in the news lately, which we'll touch on. But the real science of that, I thought you might get more in depth by going through the links and reading that. So I wanted you to have that before we started. So I'm going to share my screen and start my presentation. And we'll, if there are questions that come up when we're doing it, I'm fine to take those. But we're going to leave a nice long time at the end to be able to catch everybody's questions, because my goal is to answer your questions. That's why I'm here. So we'll do that. Let me share my screen. Okay, is that working? Are we on a presentation?
Yes.
Great, great. Okay, so let's move right in. One of the things that most people know, but not everybody, is that cacao, which is the cocoa tree and the cocoa bean, we call it cacao. There's a lot of stuff about, well, should it be cacao or should it be cocoa? The traditional historical use of the terms is that cacao is used for the tree, the blossoms, the bean. Once the bean is dried, and at that point, it starts being called cocoa. So you have a cacao bean that's still kind of raw, and after fermentation and drying, you have cocoa. So the two terms are interchangeable. People tend, there's a lot of marketing going on around chocolate, as you know. And a lot of times people will say, oh, well, we use cacao. Well, that's cocoa, just a different word for it. And it does grow on trees. And these are two trees in Hawaii at one of the plantations. And I picked this particular, I'm kind of a pod groupie. So if you ever ask me about cocoa pods, I can show you about probably 50 really beautiful pictures of cacao pods. I have a replica of one right here that I got. It's a glass one, as a recognition from the Fine Chocolate Industry Association. So that's about the size of them. They get a little bigger. They don't get much smaller, but they can get bigger than this. And they're kind of like maybe a acorn squash is a good way to think about what the pods are. But as you can see in this picture, they grow on the trunk, they grow on the limbs, they kind of grow in the center more of the tree rather than out on the edges. And because they're heavy. So the plant has realized that, you can't have a spindly little twig and put, a couple of pound pod on that. So that's where we start with chocolate. And I'm going to go into, I organize this by value chain in hopes that we could kind of understand how it all comes together, because there's people doing all different kinds of things in the business, but this is how it all comes together. So on the farm, you have the type of tree. And I know we've all heard about Forastero, Trinitario, and Criollo as the three main types. Well, with COVID, I've kind of lost 2 years, but probably about 8 years ago, there was a huge study done by Motomeyer. And he and his team have now found 12 mothers of cacao in the Amazon basin. And so that has really expanded the types of trees, because they can take every tree back to these 12 mothers, and they think over time they might end up with 20. They're still searching. And terroir, so the type of tree has a lot to do with flavor. We started the heirloom cacao preservation fund in 2010, if I remember correctly. I'm old, so I forget. And with the whole thing of matching cacao's DNA to flavor. And it's been a wonderful journey from there. And because no one had ever done that, everybody was propagating cacao trees based on their yield and their disease resistance. Nobody in the industry had really thought about flavor. And so our job has been to find great flavor. We start with flavor. We have a wonderful tasting panel. We go out and look for beans that we think have wonderful flavor. The panel tastes them. And once that is all done, then they go for their DNA analysis. So it's kind of backwards. And now I think we're on 18 different designees. And these have to be cacao that isn't normally readily out there, or that they haven't tasted before. So we're trying to narrow it down, not to just some, but to the ones that have been propagated, usually in a limited amount. But it's very exciting work, but I could talk about that for a long time. Climate change has been and will be detrimental to a lot of farms. In Africa, they're getting less rain, more rain, whatever, and that's the biggest place where cacao is grown, the biggest region. But it's impacting everyone. And the cacao farmers are having to learn how to deal with the differences that happen in their temperature. Right now, cacao grows well 20 degrees north or south of the equator. And over time, in the next 50 years, that could change, in some way, shape, or form. Hawaii, we always laugh, Hawaii is kind of the North Pole of chocolate cacao growing, because it's right at, if any of you have been to Hawaii, Kona Airport is like at 20 degrees. So, it's a challenge there, but we're having to figure it out. And the farmers all across the world are having to figure this out, because things change, as you know, yearly. Sustainability, big push for us in the HCP. We really, and that's been our point from day one. We want to be able to keep these trees. We don't want the farmers to end up not making enough money on their cacao trees so that they replace them with something else, banana, rubber, whatever. We're trying to not only keep the biodiversity of cacao trees, but also to keep the farmers actually growing those trees. So there is an economic part to what we do in that organization. And if you're interested, this just came through this week. If you go to the HCP site and click on HCP in action, you'll see excellence on the ground, and you see Mexico, Guatemala, and Peru. If you're interested in chocolate and where it's grown, those are really fun. The Peru one just came out this week, and they're really interesting. You really get a feel for the farmer, who is the backbone of the whole value chain. If we don't have the farmers, we don't have chocolate. And so here is, because I'm sure a lot of you, again, I know I'm not dealing with a consumer audience. A lot of you have probably seen cacao pods, and possibly in pictures, and possibly in person, and have seen people taking the beans out. I love this picture, and it's at a farm. A good friend of mine just above Kona in Hawaii has this lovely farm, and when we go there, if it's harvest time, we'll help her to crack and pull out the pods. And I always take a lot of pictures because I'm a pod groupie. And I love this one because it really shows how they're attached in the pod, the mucilage, or baba, if you want to call it, nicer name, for the covering of each of the seeds. And it's just a beautiful picture. So I had to share that. But for us, it's all about the bee. So this is a quick little thing on post-harvest processing. One of the big challenges with growing cacao trees is the fact that they're very labor intensive. It's not like apples or bananas where you can just go in, cut it off the tree, put it in a box and send it out. You have to do, like coffee, you have to do a whole bunch of what we call post-harvest processes. The first is harvesting right. I hate to say right, but knowing your trees well enough to know what a good pod when it's ready to be harvested. So harvesting becomes an art, which most of the farmers know and are very good at. Because if you get them too unripe, they'll be more bitter and the seeds will be much smaller, which is a problem with processing. And if you let it go too long, the seeds will germinate. So you want to, there's that perfect time when the pods are ready to harvest. So they have to pay attention to that. It's not something you can pick them and then let them ripen in the box. Doesn't work that way. So they go from the harvest and the beans are pulled out, put into a container of some kind, or if it's a farm out in the middle of nowhere, they put down banana leaves and put the beans on the ground with a covering of banana leaves and let them ferment. And that fermentation really it kills the bean, it kills the seed, so it doesn't germinate, because the temperature in there can get really high depending on your ambient temperature. So the idea of raw cacao is very hard to do. There are a couple of companies who say, yes, we don't get our beans any higher than the 116, which is the raw food movement top of the chain. But really, in essence, fermentation itself can go very much higher, very, very much higher. So we're not real crazy about using raw with any of this because we think a lot of times it's simply not true. So we have them fermented. The mucilage turns into liquid, turns into an alcohol, which in most countries, the people capture and drink. And then the beans are put out onto flats or onto the road and dried in the sun so that their moisture gets down to about 10%. So it's within that timing in the drying process, depending on whether you have a farm with enough money to buy drying racks and so on and so forth, which doesn't happen a lot. A lot of times they're just laid out on the road. And I have seen, we were in Ecuador many years ago, and we went to a collection center where all the farms in the region would bring their beans from they hadn't dried yet, they bring them wet and after fermentation, and then there they dry them. And they have two things going at the same time. For the guys who bring them dried, they put them in for storage. For the guys who bring them wet, they dry them for them. And here they were, all these cocoa beans laying out on a driveway with tire tracks going across them where the trucks had just gone past them. There was a latrine right next door, like right at the edge of the road. And there was liquid coming out of the latrine that was going into the beans. So this whole raw thing is very, very deadly. You know, I tell my students, look, there's lots of other great things about chocolate. You don't have to worry about it being raw. And having it raw means that you're exposing your clients and yourself to all the pathogens that are on that skin, or in some cases inside the skin. So you definitely need to roast to that 160 degrees or more. So anyway, so that's what the farmer does. The farmer then, once they're dry and they have that 7 to 10% moisture level, they're packed up and they're sent out. Now, there was a whole thing that Consumer Reports did, which I sent you some information on, about cadmium and lead. And lead could be on the beans, depending on what was around, diesel fumes, paint, whatever, because the lead is not in the soil. The lead is something that happens on top of. So again, removing the skins, cleaning them well, roasting them gets rid of a lot of that, but it still can be a problem, but it's not a huge, enormous problem, but it can be a problem. Cadmium, on the other hand, comes from the soil. So the farmers have no choice in that. Most of the time, even on a farm, you could have cadmium in one part of your orchard, but not the whole orchard. But the amount of cadmium in chocolate is so small that it's not even really on the list of things that have cadmium in them. Most of those things are breads, cereals, leafy greens, kale, spinach, that kind of stuff that has more cadmium than chocolate. But because chocolate is sexy and sells, when you have an article, that's what you're going to lead with. So yes, you have to eat a lot of chocolate to have a problem with cadmium. But it is there because it's natural in some soils, not all soils, just some. Bean prices. I love this. This is really bad news for all of us. Good news if that's trickling down to the farmer, which we hope it is, but we're not sure. There's a lot of times no way to tell. So this is cacao prices or cocoa bean prices for the last 20 years. And you can see that it hit 11,663 just recently. And that's per ton. So it is a huge impact on the industry as a whole. Right now, you probably have seen some price increases, but there's going to be more to come because a lot of people realized this was happening and stockpiled either beans or chocolate. And so that will go through the system, but prices will rise. Now, when we wrote our book on fine chocolate, we basically talked about the fact that chocolate is too cheap. The farmer is not getting paid much. There isn't much to as consumers, we're used to buying a Snickers bar or a Hershey's bar growing up, or Hershey's Kisses, Reese's Pieces, all that kind of stuff that we grew up with in North America is cheap chocolate because it hardly has any cocoa in it. So we're used to it being a very cheap snack. And that has been a problem for the farmers because they're not getting paid enough, and a problem for the industry as a whole. That will change as if this price increase continues. And it'll change in two ways. Number one, our commodity chocolate will get smaller, shrinkification, or get more expensive. Or the third alternative is that there's a lot of people out there trying to figure out how to get chocolate flavor and texture from mung beans, from all different kinds of stuff. So a lot of that is fueled by commodity chocolate because they want to figure out how to give you something in your Reese's Pieces or your Snickers bar that has no cocoa in it. If they can take the cocoa out and replace it with this replacement, then they make more money. So there's a lot of stuff like that going on. Nothing hugely big right now, but I think that'll change as the years go by. So you being able to have beautiful chocolate will become something you're going to have to pay for. It'll be like wine. You have your $2 chuck or you have your $300 bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon. And you're going to have to decide which one, where your comfort level and your taste bud level is. Okay, moving on. So when we talk about fine chocolate, we're talking about chocolate that is what the industry considers to be fine flavor cacao beans. So there's these fine flavor cacao beans have always been there. They've always been 3 to maybe 5, but 5% of the whole total bulk chocolate. So you have fine chocolate, and then you have the rest of the cocoa beans that are out there. So that's why we kind of call ourselves the fine chocolate industry. We're that very small, tiny niche. Again, probably 1 to 3% of the chocolate sales in the world come through us, the people in my segment. And we're all about the fact that we're looking for great quality cocoa beans as the start. So we're looking as a cocoa bean maker to find the best beans and be able to continue making really beautiful chocolate. It's all about keeping the farmers growing that, because again, they can grow something else much more easily than they can cacao. And we're hoping that we can push our chocolate makers, our chocolatiers, to make sure to give a good price to those farmers who continue to do that, which is why in the HCP we're trying to identify those. And the difference between a $12 or a $6 candy bar, chocolate bar, is basically the quality of the beans. Now, the price does not mean that that's better. It just means that that small manufacturer needs to get $12 for their chocolate bar, and you're the one who decides if it's worth it. I always tell my students that their competition isn't each other. Like Dandelion is not competing with another chocolate maker. There's tons of them. Now, in the US, we have about, I think, 200. They're not competing with each other. They're competing with that $3 Lindt bar. You know the one I mean, that excellence bar, 70% Lindt. That's their competition. If they can't taste much better than that bar, people are not going to buy another bar. They're going to buy the first bar from that person, or whatever. They're going to buy the first one because of the story, because of where they're getting the beans from, how they're processing them, how they care about their passion, their story. That will get everybody to buy a chocolate bar from you if you're a chocolate maker. Will they buy another bar and another bar and another bar and another bar from you is dependent on whether you really are delivering on flavor and texture. And to be honest, not everybody is. There are some that are and there's some that aren't, but the consumer will tell us with their wallet which ones will be the ones who can compete. And again, it all starts with the cocoa bean itself. So now we go on to value chain number 2, which is the chocolate maker. So the chocolate maker, we teach a program called Chocolate Making from the Bean. And what we do in that program is the students spend the first part of the program, the first big module in the program is all about sourcing. Because if you can't find a consistent source of good quality beans, you don't have a business. You can't make anything, your machines won't be able to do anything unless you find your source of beans. So sourcing becomes a really big challenge for most chocolate makers. They really have to work on that, and they really have to, we do tasting assignments in that program that are lots lots and lots. We want them tasting and tasting and tasting, because unless they can kind of train their palate, they're not going to know whether the beans they're buying taste good or not. So we really work a long time on that. Then we get to processing. So there are four main things that you do with chocolate. When you get your beans in, you have to clean them and you have to roast them. So that's the first kind of step. Once they're roasted, then you crack the bean, remove its shell through winnowing, and do what we call a pre-grind, where you just roughly grind them. Then you put them into a mélangeur or a ball mill or whatever, and you could, start with something this big, or you could spend millions of dollars on your plant. So you basically are taking those ground beans and you're getting them through that first grind to make them smooth. It breaks up the nibs, releases the cocoa butter, which starts to be liquid because of the friction and heat in the grinder. That's when you add your sweetener and anything else that you want to add to your thing, like vanilla or whatever. All the ingredients that go into that grinder have to be dry. Everything has to be very, very dry, because you don't want to put any moisture in there. Once you get them ground, then there are a couple of other processes you could go for. You could refine them even so that you get every single particle the same size. Usually that's done with a roll refiner. And you can conch them, which is kind of kneading this mixture. And it takes the particles and it makes them smoother just because they're rubbing up against each other. And the heat in the conch takes off volatile oils so that you're less bitter, less acidic. But a lot of chocolate makers do something like that in their grinder. If you notice, sometimes when you're buying chocolate bars from different makers, some have more of a texture than the others. That depends on how they've ground. And then you temper and mold your beans. And somebody asked from the board, about, well, what's the difference between like the chocolate I get in the UK and the chocolate I might get in France or in the US? Yes, it's all different, not because of the bean necessarily, but because usually of the sugar content and the roasting time. People in different cultures have kind of a set point. Chocolate is different than coffee or booze in that we eat chocolate as a kid. We don't normally eat coffee or booze until later. So those are like your first impressions of coffee and alcohol, usually come later in your life, where we have chocolate, a lot of us, from the time, we can remember eating. And so we end up with, that's why it's not unusual for a lot of you to like milk chocolate. That's what you grew up with. That's what you like. That's what the flavor profile that's in your mind. When you open a bar of chocolate and smell it, your taste buds can taste it already. That's just the way tasting happens. And we have a great class on chocolate tasting. And my instructor for that, Rich, is just like passionate about flavor. So he spent all this time studying how we taste. And it's all really up here. It's the memory we have sets the stage for what we're expecting to eat. So, in each culture has a different set point. In France, it's usually dark chocolate, more dark. In North America, it's more milk chocolate, more milk. So you get these different flavor profiles based on the history and the culture of the chocolate in your region. And you might have some questions about that. So when you're looking at buying fine chocolate, and we're talking now, we're still at the chocolate maker, we're talking kind of chocolate bars. Cocoa percentage doesn't tell you anything about quality. It simply states this bar has more or less sugar or sweetener, because the percentage is the percentage of the cocoa bean that's in that bar. And then whatever is left is usually a sweetener and maybe a tiny bit of lecithin or maybe a tiny bit of vanilla. That's it. So when you see a Hershey's bar, it might have 10 to 20%, if it's their dark, cocoa bean. And if you go to, say, I just mentioned dandelion, if you go to dandelion, you'll get usually around a 70%, which means that there's 70% cocoa bean, which is both the cocoa solids and the fat, which is the cocoa butter, those two, and then whatever sweetener. It doesn't tell you anything about the quality of the beans used. I have eaten some 70%, which is my particular, I kind of like something in the 70s. I have tasted bars that are horrible, and I have tasted bars that are fabulous, and they're all 70%. And so it's not anything about quality, it's only about how much sugar or sweetener is in that bar. There's lots of work on organic, fair trade, no GMO. There is no GMO in chocolate at this point. The only GMO might be in soy lecithin that they're adding to it, but most of them have gone away from that and are using a non-GMO lecithin, which is a tiny percent, like 0.1% of what it is. It's just their fluidity. Fair trade and organic. In our industry, in the fine chocolate industry, those can be problematic because the only farmers and co-ops who can really afford to get those certifications, they're very expensive, you have to go through a lot of hoops and ladders, are a small, tiny percent of the whole cacao growing industry. The big guys, Calabat, which is the biggest chocolate company in the world, has gone right after that. They have gone out to their farmers and they have helped them with money to be able to do that, because they want to be able to put those two things, organic and or fair trade, on their packages. If you go into regions, and that's in Africa 99% of the time, because that's where all the bulk chocolate comes from. If you go into South America, Central America, very few organic or fair trade, because they simply cannot afford to do that. Can they afford pesticides and herbicides? Not really either. So a lot of chocolate from the smaller farms is de facto organic, because they can't afford the pesticides and all of that kind of stuff, but they can't afford the certification. Sugar-free, vegan, keto, gluten-free, you can find chocolate with all of those. A dark chocolate usually will just contain, and it depends on the sweetener, just contain the cocoa bean and sugar. Now, if the sugar is not made with bone char, then it's totally vegan, without even having to say that. But you will notice that the bars are putting no GMO, no whatever. They're putting any kind of label on there that they can get. So you'll find a lot. The choice in the 40 years I've been in the industry, the 20, we're on our 22nd year that I've had this school, and our students come from all over the world. It was not much to lots. So there's lots of choice out there. Somebody asked if chocolate is addictive. And you know that the jury's still out. The caffeine level is very tiny. You have to eat a whole big chocolate bar to get the same thing you would get in a cup of coffee. So caffeine really is not an issue, but sugar is. And a lot of people are not addicted to chocolate, they're addicted to the sugar that's in chocolate. So there's different studies that have come out, and they really have not shown that there's an actual addiction to cocoa beans, but there is definitely addiction to sugar. Who knows what's coming. Anyway, well, now on value chain number 3, how's my time? Oh, I got to stop soon. What do chocolatiers do? We basically make small, tiny wedding cakes about that big. It's, chocolatiers buy and source chocolate from chocolate makers. So they're partners in the business. And the quality of the chocolate they buy is the quality of the products they produce. And this is just a fun little thing about how to make a bonbon. And we call a bonbon, any filled chocolate we call a bonbon, because when I started writing the curriculum for the back in 2001 or something, I basically was talking about chocolate, chocolates, and chocolate, and they were all like interchangeable. Like, is a chocolate a bonbon or is it a bar? So I started using the French term, which is bonbon. So we feel that most chocolatiers will make bonbons, confections, bars. Now, bars have replaced bark. And a lot of you will remember used to go into a candy or chocolate store and they had all this broken up chocolate, usually with nuts. My dad would buy it with Spanish peanuts when we were in LA, and oh, so good. Anyway, it's now chocolatiers have found, instead of making the bark, which is messy and ugly and you have to weigh it and everything, they just make it into bars now. So if you go into any chocolate maker, now I have chocolatier, you'll find bars. I love this picture. I can't believe I took this picture. I am like shocked. It shows what a bonbon is now, and right now at this point in time. It's usually layers of flavor. This one has meringue, it has ganache, and it has a cookie layer. I mean, what more could you want? And this is Stick to Me Sweets in New York City, and they do beautiful work, and there's beautiful work everywhere. We were so lucky. USA Today came out with the 10 best chocolatiers in the US, and our graduates were 8 of those. So we're very proud. Anyway, so we love our chocolatiers. We think this is Patrick Roget. I wanted to show this. He was the first one, this is his lime caramel, to really work on getting depth in the shell through spray painting, getting that depth. His bonbons, his caramels, his fruit caramels, are as beautiful as this picture. This is my graduate in Lima, Peru, Giorgio, Rosalind chocolate. I mean, he took a mold, just a bonbon mold. Remember, these are about this big. They're tiny. He took that and he made it into unicorns. If you want to see, if you do Rosalind chocolate in Lima and look at the work he does, it's phenomenal. And that's hard to do. It's real easy to kind of make a bar, but it's real hard to do this kind of work. And that's what chocolatiers are doing. And I wanted to end with this one thing, that not all bonbons have to be molded and colored and beautiful. Jean-Charles Rochot in Paris, this is his ganache, and it does it in little dice-sized pieces that you can eat. Fabulous. Okay, time for question and answers. So I stopped sharing. There we go. Got it.
Good, good. I don't see any questions in the chat right now. But, you know, we really like to have you um, uh, unmute yourself and turn on your video screen and ask your questions directly so that we feel like we're sharing the same virtual room.
Right.
Jenny Rossoff, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, Jenny.
Thank you. That's such great information. Thank you so much for sharing. In my business, we don't do bonbons. We're working actually on a hot fudge sauce,
Oh, yeah.
which
Okay.
is lots of fun, and I'm learning a lot. But the thing that came to mind for me was that 10 or 12 years ago, I went to a conference, and one of the desserts served was I don't even remember what the base of it was. There was a white chocolate curried ganache.
Oh my goodness.
And I've tried a few times to replicate it, but I am not a confectioner. I'm mostly savory. And I got disappointed. But if you were going to attempt a white chocolate curried ganache, what would you do?
Okay. One of the problems with curry is that it is a dry powder.
Yes.
So you're probably having problems with the texture and the kind of mouthfeel that you're getting, like you could get something who's very dry and crumbly. I would suggest you put the curry in a bag and put it in your cream and do a cold steep overnight and use the cream.
And why? Oh, wow. Okay. And why cold versus warm?
Because if it was me and I was doing recipe development, I would do it both ways.
Okay.
But the cold steep, you're setting it for longer. So there's a longer period when, because curry is made up of a bunch of different spices,
Right.
you're kind of giving them all a chance. And I would go in and kind of squeeze the bag, move the bag around a little bit with my fingers, just to make sure that different parts of it were all getting wet and being able to come out. Because if you got just the heat and not the other spices, the turmeric, the whatever's in there, I would do it that way. I wouldn't try to put it into my ganache. I would try to bring that flavor
So infuse it.
from the cream. Yeah. Now you could even do a water ganache, which would mean that you have even more, like make a tea kind of with because the water doesn't have any dairy in it. So
Right.
it's going to bring more flavor. And you can make a ganache with any kind of liquid.
Really?
Yep. Yep.
So
I'm
like
not here
make
to
a
sell,
curry
but we
tea.
have a program for that. If anybody wants to know ganache from a real deep level, we have a graduate program for that. Yes. But yes, try with, I would try, because you're using white chocolate, which has a lot of dairy in it.
Yeah.
So it's basically sugar and cocoa butter and
Right.
milk, dry milk powder. So I would try flavoring water real, and you're just going to have to experiment with how much.
Right.
But I think that'll give you a pop of flavor where the other didn't. The other thing you could do is a caramel, make a curry caramel and put a layer of caramel under your white ganache. Yeah.
Okay.
That will
And
really make it good for you.
one more question. If you were going to do this, what kind of chocolate, what base product would you use? What brand?
It depends on your mouthfeel, okay? Valrhona, for example, they use their cocoa butter level is higher, because that's what I would look for. I would look for my cocoa butter level,
Okay.
because that's going to help you to not have as much dry milk powder and sugar, right?
Great.
So if it was me, I would use Valrhona. I've heard very good things about Cocoa Berries White. I can't remember which one. The only problem I have with cacao berry or cocoa berry, however you want to pronounce it, is that sometimes I feel the chocolate is a little gritty. I don't know if
Oh,
anybody else has found that. It's just, and maybe it's my mouth because I've been eating chocolate for so long, but I just find it a tiny bit more gritty. But I would try Valrhona if your budget allows. You know, if you want this to be a commercial product.
no, this is just for me for fun.
Well, then get Valrhona. Oh, for sure. Oh,
Well, I mean,
absolutely.
you never know, but
Yeah, yeah.
okay, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
So I want to tell the group, I had hoped to send you all the resource page that we got from Pam before the meeting, but that didn't happen. And so I'm going to send it with the link afterwards. And that has links to, you know, the policy questions about sustainability and about child labor and those sorts of serious things. But it also has a wonderful recipe for hibiscus caramel and a link to uh, uh, one of the pages on Ecole Chocolat that explains to you how to enrobe candies in chocolate just in time for Valentine's Day.
There we go. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I have a question.
Sure.
In the field, are there animals or birds that like to eat the fruit, the cacao fruit?
Yes, yes, but mostly rodents, rats, monkeys. Yeah, but no, it is. They'll poke a hole in it. You'll see cocoa pods with holes. Yeah. Now, if anybody has this wild urge to go work on a cocoa farm, we do this program in I got to think here a minute, April. I think it's going to be in April. We're just opening it up now in Hawaii, where we actually go to a fabulous cocoa farm and you kind of work on the farm and with the chocolate maker, Manoa Chocolate, as well in Hawaii. That's a fun program. If anybody wants to get down and get dirty, I can say that because my graduates and my friends there that own the cocoa farm that are super experts do the program. I just am lucky enough that they'll do it for us. Yeah. Anything
And
else?
yes, Joanne Lauser has her hand raised.
Great.
Go ahead, Joanne.
Hi, thanks. Hi, Pam.
Hi.
I'm just wondering, what's the best way to store chocolate? I mean, I'm just an amateur chocolate maker, but like, and also, I've bought Calabo in the past from Danielle Chocolat Belge when I used to be
Yeah.
able to get it as a big slab, and it was amazing
Yeah.
to get their dark chocolate. But back then, it was affordable. But I've
Yeah.
noticed like the superstore also sells them in chunks, the Calabo. Is
Yeah.
it the same quality?
Yeah.
Is it?
Same
Okay.
chocolate.
Okay.
What they figured out when I started in the business in 1980, I think I opened the store in 81. I I was buying from Calabot because they were the only game in town. I wanted to buy from Valrhona, but they weren't shipping into Canada, but Calabot was. And customers love Calabot D811. You know, they love it. And, you know, people kind of in the industry kind of poo-poo Calabot a little bit, but they make darn good chocolate for a consumer, you know, and I still like it. And I would get those huge 5 kilo blocks, and it was a process. to chip them up. I used a ice pick.
Yep.
And so they got smart about 10, 15, maybe 20 years. I think Valrhona was the first one to make it into what they call drops or wafers, or it has all sorts of names. But yeah, it's the same stuff. They just process it into drops because their biggest market, you have to realize, for chocolate, the biggest market is pastry chefs, not chocolatiers. We're a very tiny, tiny part of the industry. But people like Valrhona and Calabo and Ecom out of Italy, Guittard out of the US, they sell to pastry chefs. You know, the ones on big cruise ships, the ones in, you know, that's their market. And those guys said, give me drops, give me drops. Yeah.
How do you store, like, what's the best way to store, like, either the chunks or the drops?
Okay, you want them to not get any moisture. So you don't want to put them in the fridge. You want to put them in a container that's like a food safe plastic container, and put them in the coolest part of your house and just leave them there. They'll be fine. You can eat that chocolate a year or two down the road, as long as you don't get smells from something else, like don't put onion next to that, and you don't get rodents or insects. Yeah, no, that's the one thing about cocoa butter. Cocoa butter is extremely stable. That's why they use it for lipsticks and makeup and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, good question.
Thank you. Lisa Holderness Brown, go ahead.
Hi, I have a quick question about I buy a lot of chocolate bars, probably way too many. But I'm always trying to figure out, all these new ones come out, and it's kind of like craft beer, you know, the cooler
Oh yeah,
the more you think it's going to be extra special. But then I turn around to read the ingredients, and that's where I'm always a little bit curious, because I don't understand the differences sometimes between the words they're using, like cacao liqueur versus mass versus just like stone ground
all the same
cocoa.
thing.
Okay, because
Yeah,
so
Lisa, it's all the same thing. It's the cocoa bean ground up.
okay,
And so they have to delineate sometimes the cocoa butter if they add extra cocoa butter.
all right.
Sometimes they'll pull the cocoa butter percentage out anyway, because they have to do that for the ingredient nutrition label. But anything that says cocoa mass, that says cacao, that says chocolate liquor, and the liquor is called that only because of the grinding process where it turned liquid. So way, 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 way in the history, they started calling it chocolate liquor, even though it has nothing to do with alcohol. Anyway, it confuses people.
It
So
does.
it could even be like done as cocoa powder, even though you don't really want that, but it can be any of those things. They're all the same thing.
So is there a way, other than how pretty the picture is, or just common knowledge of which brands are touted as being the most high quality? I mean, how do you know as a consumer which ones are going to be great?
You have to taste them.
Okay.
No, literally you have to, because you will find, and I don't know where you're located, but where are you?
I'm in Des Moines, Iowa, actually.
Okay, so if you go like to Whole Foods, for example, they have this huge, you know, at least in Vancouver, they have this huge shelf of chocolates. And if you're kind of working your way through that, you will find that you like the bars from a certain manufacturer better than you do from the others. And that's your own taste buds. Like you and I could probably taste the same chocolate bar, and you might like it better than I do, only because of whatever kind of is in it. So it's like there's no better or worse when it comes to chocolate makers. It's their own vision and their skill they bring to it. Some are better than that, some are not as good. So you have to just taste them to say to yourself, okay, this is good. And what I would pay attention to if you're in Whole Foods, what I would pay attention to is, does that bar come from someone who's making it from cocoa beans? Like, are they saying that they make their bar from cocoa beans? Because you can, people like the Goba, people like Lily's, owned by Hershey's now, they don't make their own chocolate. Santa Barbara chocolate, they don't make their own chocolate. They buy from Calabo, from somebody else, and just repackage it. And that's fine. That's been an accepted practice, as long as they don't say we make our chocolate from the bean. So I would start with the people who make their chocolate from the bean, just to narrow it down. And then, give yourself that opportunity. Now, a chocolate bar you buy in the store I have a wine fridge and in the bottom, I put a plastic bin. And I have bars in there that I've had for a year. You don't have to finish it. You can put it away and try something else. And in that trial and error, you'll find who you like.
Thank you.
You bet.
So we are at 3:02 Eastern time, but I see there's two more hands up, and if you
I'll
need
try
to
to talk
go,
quick.
please go. But we want to give our attendees a chance to raise their burning questions. So unmute yourself, please, Christina Jacobs, and go for it.
Hi, good
Hi,
afternoon.
Christina.
Hi. I'd love to just kind of get your perspective on the topic of ceremonial grade cacao.
Oh, yeah.
And if kind of one of my questions coming from that perspective is, does the HCP have a definitive metric of what might constitute that? Or on the other hand, is that more kind of a story or a marketing
story.
element?
It's a story. Yeah, it's a story. And I don't mean this in the way it sounds. It's a marketing gig. It's a marketing gig. And I have graduates who are in the ceremonial space. And it's basically, okay, it's just the chocolate they like. And the chocolate they appreciate the story of where they're getting it from. Hopefully those people have gone to the farm and actually know about the beans and have done that. But really, there is no such thing as a ceremonial grade. Nothing makes it any different from the bars you buy basically at Whole Foods. Unless it's
Thank
been
you.
blessed by somebody, if somebody's blessed it in the process of it coming, then sure. But really, it's kind of just the newest kind of marketing thing. Not in a bad way,
Very interesting. Now, Fran, would you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, Pam, this was fabulous. Thank you.
Oh,
I
great.
recently got some cocoa butter silk, which is tempered cocoa butter, as a way
Right.
to work to make tempering chocolate a little bit easier.
Yep.
I tried it once. I'm not sure about it. Do you have an opinion?
Is it dry?
It's like a chunks of cocoa
Yeah.
butter that I
Okay.
grated.
What it basically is just a chunk of tempered cocoa butter
Yeah. Okay.
that you're supposed to grate and use as seed. And you would do the same with the chocolate if you've got the tempered part of it. So once it's hardened, it is basically just like using chocolate grated. Okay. The problem with grating cocoa butter is cocoa butter, it'll melt, but you may end up, and this may be one of the problems, you may end up with little pieces of cocoa butter that haven't like melted completely. So I've got a trick for you. There is you can buy cocoa butter silk makers, machines that will make it, and it keeps it soft. So it just melts like that. You're not grating. Anyway, there are expensive ones. There are ones for $1,000. One of our instructors has made one for years that's fabulous called Easy Temper. There is another that you can buy, Magic Temper, that's more expensive from the bigger guys. But we just found the Broad, BROD, and Taylor sourdough home. And it holds, what you do is you take that cocoa butter you've got, put it in a Pyrex dish, a Pyrex like mason jar with a lid on, stick it in there, and you set your temperature for like 92 degrees, and you leave it for 20 hours. And what you will get, Fran, is you will get that cocoa butter in kind of the form of like a paste, and that is silk. And that paste you use just like maybe 1%. You know, you'll find, depending on the chocolate and the mass of chocolate, you will find through experimentation how much you need, but boom, that'll do it for you.
Thank you. I don't
And
do
it's like $150 or something for this machine, and you can put your sourdough in there too.
Thank you. The other thing I wanted to ask you is about, are you familiar with the Valrhona Inspirations line and their white chocolate?
Yeah, absolutely.
I've been using that. I don't know that I'm going to be tempering chocolate with the silk. I just got this from a manufacturer, but it was interesting. I seed temper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, inspiration is great. What it is, for those who don't know, it's cocoa butter with dried fruit, freeze-dried fruit powder. And they put it in a grinder and they grind it so that it's smooth and creamy, and just, and because of the cocoa butter, just sets up and makes very expensive. Right, Fran? Very
It
expensive.
is very expensive. I was gifted this and
Yeah.
I love it. The flavor is amazing.
Oh, the flavors are fabulous.
Too. No, I
Now
don't know.
you can make it yourself.
Oh.
You just need a melancher. You need a grinder. You know, they make those wet grinders, Wonder grinders. You know, you just put your cocoa butter in there and your dried fruit powder and some sugar, and off you go.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Oh, you bet, you bet. If you want to, if anybody wants to email me, just email me and I can send you some stuff. So Fran, if you want to know more about that, just email me. Love to, that's my job. I get to help people.
Thank you.
You bet.
And last question from Stephanie.
Hi, I'm just wondering what is the lifespan of the nibs inside the cacao bean before the bean shell is removed? How long do the nibs stay good?
If it's dried, because you're talking, what you've got is kind of a dried cocoa bean. And what happens with the cocoa bean, for those who don't know, is, you know how when you buy an almond, you can tell there's two leaves and usually a little tiny stem, but there's kind of two leaves, two sections. Well, in cacao, you have a bunch of leaves that are all in there and a little stem. And so when you dry that cocoa bean, those, when you roast them, they break open and you get all these shards, which are called cocoa nibs. And again, you can keep those for the same amount of time as you can keep chocolate, as long as they've been roasted. So you want them roasted so they've been cleaned, right, to over 160 degrees. So you got no bad guys in there. And then you just put them in a plastic or metal container, and you can keep them for just as long as you could keep chocolate,
Thank you.
because they have the cocoa butter in them inherently.
Well, Pam, thank you so much for
I'm so happy.
enlightening us on so many things chocolate. I think all of us have learned at least one or two things, even if we're working with chocolate all the time. And
Right.
now, a word or two about Les Dames d'Escoffier International from our first Vice President, Marilyn Freundlich.
Hi, everyone. I
Yes.
think everyone is leaving quickly, so I'll keep this short. But Pam, thanks so much for your fabulous presentation. No question, as I was listening to you, I said, this woman is the OG of everything chocolate. So it was great having you. And again, thank you so much for this so well organized and informative presentation. And thanks to everyone for attending our live online monthly presentations. They'll continue and, to focus and enhance our LDEI mission, which, as all of you know, is to inspire, educate, advance, and support women in food, beverage, and hospitality, because we want you all to achieve excellence in leadership and philanthropy. So I hope everyone will join us next month on March 24th. Our live online topic is Mediterranean meal planning. And a big shout out to Sheila for coordinating all of these presentations on a monthly basis. I know it's a big job, and we were so thrilled that she stepped up to the plate to do this.
And it's truly my pleasure. Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next time. Again, Pam, thank you so much. It was
Thank
terrific.
you. It's been fun.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Take care. See you next time.